It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I am looking forward to talking with my guest today. Joining me is Kevin Davis. He's president of TopLine Leadership and author of multiple books, including his latest, The Sales Manager's Guide to Greatness, 10 Essential Strategies for Leading Your Team to the Top. So Kevin Davis, welcome to Accelerate.
Well, thanks for having me, Andy.
My pleasure. So take a minute, introduce yourself. I know you're a big skier, but maybe tell us how you got your start in sales and how you ended up where you are today.
Well, my first job out of college was selling for Lanier, and today Lanier is part of Ricoh Corporation. It's office technology products, but back then we called it copiers and dictation equipment.
I remember.
And
back when we sold those things.
And then I moved up with them, first to sales manager, where I managed a team of 8 salespeople, and then was a general manager for Lanier in Southern California, where I managed sales managers. So I've had experience at the 2 key transitions, the transition from selling into managing, which is probably the biggest transition in any profession, and then, of course, the transition from managing salespeople to managing sales managers. So
well, at the same time, lots of transitions in the industry that you were serving as well. I mean, it seemed like, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, postage machines go away, and
the whole, it's all about connectivity, facilities management. That's just, print management, outsourcing. I mean, it's not the way it was when I started. So, but isn't that true of just about every industry out there?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, it's you're working in a company these days, and you don't have the same parade of young, freshly scrubbed salespeople knocking on your door every minute trying to sell you a copy machine or a postage machine or a computer or something like that.
And that's how we did. It was straight commission sales. You would take the elevator to the top floor of an office building, and you would walk into offices, ask to see the general manager or president, and without an appointment. And that's how it all started. And so,
well, interesting question.
You hunt to earn a living, and so it's a great place to start for me.
Well, I was going to say, it was an interesting perspective because I was reading an article yesterday, and the author was talking about cold emailing and cold calling as prospecting strategies, and it'd be interesting to get your take on this, because what the author said is, well, selling's not easy like it was 20, 30 years ago. Now it's hard, because he's talking about prospecting, because you've got these gatekeepers and voicemail, and I'm sitting there thinking, guys like you, and I, certainly me at the same time when I got started my career selling a similar product to what you were, we were knocking on 40, 50, 60 doors, actual doors a day, where there's a physical gatekeeper inside that door. Yeah, I don't think it was easier by any stretch of the imagination.
I got to tell you this one, Andy. I was one of the cold calls I made, and we were trained to just walk in and ask for the person whose name's on the door, right? So I get back from training, and my first territory was Palo Alto and Stanford. Mm-hmm. And I took the elevator to the top floor of the 525 University Avenue building, which I know you know where that is.
Right, the only high rise at that time.
Correct. And the elevator doors open up, and I'm just doing what they trained me on my initial sales training program. I notice it's one of the big 8 accounting firms. That's what they were at the time, 8 of them. So I walk up to the receptionist and say, "I'm here to see Arthur Anderson." She says, "He's dead." That was like My first morning in sales.
Well, for people listening to this that don't understand why we're laughing is at the time Arthur Anderson was one of the big 8 accounting firms, and that was the name of the big 8 accounting firm. So, yeah, it's like walking in asking, "Can I talk to Mr. Ernst or Mr. Young?" Right?
Yeah, exactly. And Mr. Ernst or Mr. Young, but that's kind of the first impression I got was, hey, maybe customers sometimes don't do what you want them to do, like they trained us they probably would in sales training.
Well, but I was thinking back to this comment with the guy saying it seemed it was so easy back in the day, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, I had guys that were my first territory where I first managed was in the East Bay area of the San Francisco Bay Area, so we went from Fremont to Vallejo out to Pittsburgh and Antioch.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had salespeople work for me that were held up at gunpoint and were shot at. And I was like, yeah, I think that was a little bit harder than making a phone call, a cold call on the phone.
Well, that's where I was the sales manager in that same East Bay area. And one of my sales reps' cars got broken into and all the equipment was stolen. Well, they couldn't fence it. The thief couldn't fence it. So I'm in the office one day and I get a call from this guy asking me if I want to buy our equipment back. I said, I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? So I said, well, hang on a second. I got to check with my boss, but let me get your phone number and call you back. So I got his phone number. I called the Oakland Police Department. I said, here's what's going on. And they said, okay. And they called the guy back posing as my boss and set up a sting operation, and they busted the guy. I had to go in the police car, and they had like 3 cops converge in on this. I mean, that was back when $10,000, $20,000 worth of equipment was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, hey, that was needless to say. I feel your pain there, Andy.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's both jobs are hard, but I didn't. Yeah, I was just thought interesting since you and I are talking is like let's dispel that myth that somehow it was easier when you had to make those calls in person. Yeah. So you've written a new book. I mean, you've written several books, but you've written a new book called "The Sales Manager's Guide to Greatness." So we talked about 10 essential strategies for leading your team to the top. What was the impetus for writing this book? Because there's been really within the last 9 months, 12 months, there's really been an influx of new books written about sales management. It seems to be sort of I don't want to say the topic du jour, but one that's getting a lot of focus.
Yeah, well, this is an area of specialization that I've had for the last 20 years. And so I've had the opportunity to work with a variety of different corporate clients, delivering our 2-day sales management skills workshop. One of our clients believed in it so strongly that they had over 3,000 sales managers attend our 2-day program. So that's being in a variety of different venues with groups of anywhere from 10 to 25 sales managers for a couple days over 15 or 20 years. I learned a lot from the audience along the way, and examples and stories and things of that nature that, you have to tell these days in order to, provide value to busy sales managers. I mean, companies, if they're going to take their sales managers out of the field for a couple of days, they don't want to do it unless what they're going to get is something that's proven and works.
But it seems like
I think we have something that's proven and works for sales managers, and I just finally got around to writing a book about it.
Well, it seems like one of the themes that comes up in a lot of the books that have been published in the last year about this, and I've interviewed a number of the authors, is that sales managers' job has become increasingly difficult given the technology is available, the data. There's so many demands on them other than managing and coaching their teams. And that sort of seems like a first order issue that a lot of the books try to address is how do we help sales managers focus and make the best use of their time?
Certainly, it's extremely important for sales managers to take a step back and rethink their priorities.
But do they have control over their priorities?
They have more control than I think they do.
Because this is one of the themes that is that people are talking about is that, well, yeah, senior management is saying, putting so many requirements, reporting requirements and so on frontline sales managers, that's what becomes the big distraction. And these managers feel like they have to prioritize, paying attention to what the bosses say versus what they think they should be doing for their team.
Well, and certainly one aspect of sales management productivity that many companies would benefit from would be looking at the time wasters that they inflict on sales managers, for sure. But another part of the problem are sales managers. They accept too many meeting invites, sometimes make their calendars available. So, all the other departments in a company always want to get sales' input on everything. And the sales manager is the one that gets dragged into that. And, it's just, the question is, you have to take a step back and ask yourself, as a sales team leader, how are you going to be measured? And what really matters? And what should you stop doing? Because, having a to-do list is important, but what's on your to-don't list? What are the things that you need to stop doing? And accepting all these meetings. The average sales manager who spends 2 hours a day in email, that adds up to over 60 days a year on email. If there are ways in which we can manage that time loss a little better, perhaps reduce that from 60 days down to 40 days, that gives you an extra 20 days of coaching every year. The research on sales coaching is pretty compelling. The Sales Management Association 2015 research found that companies that have optimized a coaching program for both quality and quantity of coaching see a 17% increase in revenues. And according to CSO Insights, which is part of MHI Global, sales coaching, good sales coaching commitment and implementation will result in increased win rates for salespeople. So the question is, as a sales manager, what's the best use of your time? That's the leadership question that everybody asks or should ask. And that is, am I going to continue to make everybody else happy and respond to people's emails within 20 minutes of them sending it to me and continue to, play this reactive game? Or am I going to focus my time and attention on increasing win rates and increasing the expertise of our salespeople? What do you want to be remembered for?
Well, yeah. Let's unpack that a little bit, because I think that at the top, but I think that and I advocate this for sales managers, and I found myself in this position when I was managing teams, and I had to do this, is you have to a certain degree, you have to exercise sort of a form of passive resistance to some of the demands on your time from people above you.
Yeah.
And I recall a situation where one company I was working for, there was a completely useless monthly meeting that, in my case, actually was on the other side of the country that I was supposed to attend. And what I did is just made my schedule such that, every month at that time, I was out with a customer. And after about 10 months, the CEO, calls me and said, so, we haven't seen you at this meeting. I said, oh yeah, I'm out talking to customers, and my numbers were great numbers and team was doing fantastic. But the guy was really frustrated that I was not attending his meeting. But on the other hand, he sort of understood that, I was making that call.
Yep.
So, managers, I think you have to sort of have some intestinal fortitude and push back. Because if you don't push back, people are going to continue to demand more of your time.
So just last week, I was working with a group of sales managers in Toronto, and they had flown in for a meeting plus my workshop from all over North America. And, one of the first modules we talk about is this whole issue of leading yourself, making choices yourself, that, focusing on what, you really, swinging the pendulum back towards more observational sales coaching. Mm-hmm. And, how do you do that? How do you buy time to make that happen? And certainly one of the ways is repurposing the conversations you're having now. We can get into that topic a little later, but let me finish my thought. And is that as our 2-day workshop progressed, on day 2, several of the sales managers commented, it's like, wow, my salespeople are doing so much more now that I'm gone. And they're actually applying some of the techniques that we were talking about during the first day in their, taking breaks and responding on their iPhones and things of that nature to their salespeople. And their salespeople were solving a lot of these problems themselves. So there's this core sense that many sales managers have kind of evolved into a habitual path or process of, I am responsible for solving everybody's problems.
Well, this is I was just at a workshop yesterday talking about one of the topics was about managing different multi-generations in the workforce.
Yeah.
And what you're describing is like sort of a helicopter parent, right?
Yeah.
The helicopter parent helicopters in to solve the problems for the kids, and there's a lot being written that's not necessarily working out well for the kids that are the subject of that. So because they don't learn how to solve their own problems.
So when somebody brings you a problem, I encourage sales managers to ask 2 magic questions. What have you done about it so far? And what do you think you ought to do? And at the very least, that gives the manager an opportunity to observe the knowledge and expertise of the salesperson bringing the problem and whether or not that sales rep is capable of solving it themselves or not. But, so there are a variety of different techniques that aren't terribly difficult, but it is certainly about asking yourself on a continual basis, what is the impact on my sales team of what I'm about to do?
It's just, to me, that's, such a great thing for people to be thinking about, because certainly in line with what I talk about, sales in general is we're not robots. We're not operating on autopilot. Everything we do has to be deliberately done, has to be done for a reason.
Absolutely.
Whether you're a manager or sales rep, why am I calling this customer? I was just talking about this at a speech I gave yesterday. What's the plan?
But what happens is that many sales managers kind of have this thought that if I solve this problem for this sales rep, he or she will go make more sales calls. And so there's this self-propaganda mindset where, and the outcome of that, when you turn it into a habit, is if you solve other people's problems for them, they'll bring you more problems. And it's a vicious cycle. You're chasing your own tail without ever catching it. And the net impact of that is that, let's say somebody brings you a problem, right? And usually what they say is, hey, Andy, we have a problem. Right? Notice they're using the pronoun we. And because you don't have the information
because they're team players.
Correct. And because you don't have the information, you're anxious, you want to pull the trigger, you're an action-oriented manager, you crave the speed, you love to kind of make important decisions and on the fly. And so because you don't have the information that you need to solve this rep's problem, you say, let me look into it and I'll get back to you. And in the blink of an eye, two things that are typically associated with a subordinate in a relationship have just occurred. Number one, you accepted a delegation from your sales rep. And number two, you agreed to provide them with a progress report.
Hadn't thought about it that way, right?
So again, effective sales management starts with self-leadership. It begins with accepting that some things you do have higher payoff than other things, and that you will be a more effective leader if you apply yourself to the more high value, high payoff sales management tasks. And it's just, that's one of the issues. And of course, the other issue is when you delve into the reason why we get involved in these problems, why we solve reps' problems, why we do this, why we do that, why we spend sometimes 8:30 to 5 doing tasks that are on other people's job descriptions and not ours. The reason is because of our instincts. I mean, the underlying cause is that when we were peak performing salespeople, we developed, honed, and were rewarded for certain sales competencies that distinguished us from everybody else, and that's why we got promoted. But in effective sales manager, in some ways, requires a completely different mindset. And so these sales instincts that contributed to our success in the past hamper our effectiveness as leaders. And one of them is this, focus on results, this bias towards action, decisiveness, where it's we like to be the caller of the plays. We like to kind of be in control and take charge. And one of the ways you see this when you're out with one of your salespeople is when the customer is talking, your salesperson is talking to the customer, and you don't like what's being said, and so you do what I call move over, Rover, let the great one take over. And you kind of take over the meeting and run it your way. But that sends a message to the customer that your sales rep is unqualified.
Right.
And it sends a message to your sales rep that you don't trust them. And you destroy any coaching opportunity. So this is just one of the examples. A much more effective leadership characteristic is observation and just watching your people. So it's this bias for action. And it's not just taking over the call. That's one of the examples. The other is taking over the problems. I mean, it's taken over. We're kind of control freaks, but we have to manage that, because if you don't, then at the end of the quarter, you have to look back and ask yourself, is your sales team better today than they were 3 months ago? And if they're not, then you didn't do your job.
Well, yeah, possibly because you're doing their jobs.
Right.
I mean, if you do the tactic that you talked about, and I've seen this on numerous occasions, where the impatient sales manager jumps in, does the move over, Rover thing that you talked about. Well, yeah, customer's never going to talk to that sales rep again, not in a meaningful way, because they're going to wait for the sales manager to come back.
Well, and they're going to contact the sales manager because that's where the authority is, and that's where they get bigger discounts.
Well, there's that too. Yeah, but don't get me started on that, because I've written whole articles. Somebody once asked me, or sort of posed this question about, how do you stop salespeople from discounting? I was like, yeah, salespeople don't discount, managers discount. So,
what we know back kind of on that other topic is that the most successful people have the greatest difficulty giving up the things that made them successful to begin with. And so as a sales manager, we keep selling and we keep engaging in these selling competencies that we are excellent at. And yet we've got to completely change our mindset.
Yeah.
Because anyway.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the watchwords that a manager gave me early on in my first management job, worked for a guy who was really smart. And yeah, he said, your job is to be in control, but not obvious control.
Yeah, that's good.
And I always thought that was a really great way to think about it.
Yeah.
As you're leading a team, everybody needs to know who the boss is, because that's where ultimate responsibility flows. But people need to feel enabled and empowered to do what they need to do.
Absolutely. That's a source of motivation. And needless to say, a motivated sales team is better than one that's not.
Well, in your book, you talk about motivation. I talk about a great segue is I think you make the point in there that maybe perhaps as high as, I think you used the term, 75% of performance issue on a team are due to bad attitudes or willingness problems, as opposed to, so really attitudinal versus skill deficiencies, I guess, is really what you're boiling down to.
Exactly. And
so why do you think that's the case?
Well, you mean why do we have more attitude problems these days?
Well, no, first of all, how did you arrive at the conclusion that's more attitudinal versus a deficiency in skill or behaviors, let's say?
Well, on Tuesday of this week, I did a webinar where we had 135 sales managers on the 1-hour webinar. And we had a poll question, and that was a poll question. And I did another one back in May with 160 sales managers. So that's what they said. So attitude is part of it, but the conversation, when you have a sales rep that has a bad attitude, I mean, there's two issues here. One is, why is this attitude problem happening? So I would suggest sales managers too, when they're thinking about a sales rep that's underperforming or one that has been good in the past but isn't good now, or productivity has fallen off, is to analyze each sales performance problem you encounter by looking at through two different lenses: skill and will. And
so will defined as?
Will defined as attitude, commitment, engagement, coachability.
Okay.
That's one of the exercises we work on with sales managers, is to think about your peak performing salesperson, that best sales rep who's on your team right now. What are the qualities that he or she possesses? And invariably, 70% of those qualities that sales managers articulate are attitudinal qualities. And yet this is kind of one of those truths that every sales manager can agree to. But if you ask the sales manager, what is a great attitude in a sales rep, they will probably answer, I can't tell you, I just know it when I see it.
Yeah, like the Supreme Court decision on pornography, right?
Right.
I don't know what it is, but I can't define it, but I know what it is when I see it, yeah.
Correct. And so then what are they doing? They're trying to, so we help them to define it in such a way that they can share it and set it as a standard, set greatness as a standard and define it. And just take one attribute of a great attitude that comes up frequently: coachability.
Well, I'm glad you said it. I was going to say that. To me, that's first on the list.
It is. I agree. So you have to ask yourself, what is it? So back, do you remember, Andy, the NCAA championship basketball game between Villanova Wildcats and University of North Carolina back in April?
Oh, this past one.
Yeah. Where the Villanova won it at the buzzer with an incredible 3-point shot, the national championship.
Right.
And the reason they won it was excellent teamwork, distributing the ball on that final time down the court. And so I thought, wow, I got to learn a little bit more about Coach Jay Wright, who's the head coach of the Villanova Wildcats. And so I did, and I read up on him a little bit and wrote an article on it. And according to Coach Wright, he looks for players, recruits to his program that have the twin qualities of humble and hungry. And obviously the hunger, we all get that, the desire to be, have, and do more, the ambition, right?
Sure.
But the humility, Coach Wright said, if a recruit does not have humility, he won't be coachable because they already know it all. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of that was a keeper right there. We don't typically think of looking for humility in an interview process with salespeople, and yet, according to Coach Jay Wright of the NCAA champion Villanova Wildcats, that's what you need for coachability.
Well, and to give an example more germane to what some of the people listening to the show made here is I've had as a guest on the show a couple occasions, Mark Roberge, who was the first VP of sales at HubSpot, and they've been wildly successful. But in their interview process for salespeople, in specific, they may do it for other functions as well, is they integrate coaching into it. So what they do is they have somebody give like a little presentation, and then they sit them down and they coach them, and they have them go off for a few minutes and then come back and give it again. Mm-hmm. And they see whether they took the coaching.
Right.
And I think it's sort of a simple, brilliant way to see whether they, exemplify this humility as you talked about, to be able to, say, it's not about me, it's about getting better, and, take the advice and integrate it into what they're doing.
Yep. And that's a great, Mark's book, The Sales Acceleration Formula, is a great read. Yeah. And I agree with him wholeheartedly on that one.
So another question, topic I want to get into is we talked about coaching. I just want to jump back to that second, because you had an interesting thing in your book too about when you said be more strategic about your coaching time, and you reference a Harvard Business Review study that said that, I think I'm quoting it here, in research involving thousands of reps, they found that coaching, even world-class coaching, has a marginal impact on either the weakest or the strongest performers in a sales organization. So in your book, you're talking about, being strategic about your coaching time. What are you advocating people do?
Well, there are two, and again, this two ways or instincts that many sales managers have that are counterproductive to developing an elite sales team. One is they tend to chase the big deals.
Right.
And invariably that leads them to work with their best salespeople who are working the biggest deals, who actually need them the least, because they typically have the best attitudes, not always, but often, and they're the most skilled on the team. So the other instinct, which is counterproductive to developing an elite team, is a tendency to work with the poorest performers. But as a friend of mine once told me, miracle turnarounds happen mainly in Hollywood movies. And if and the reason why we spend a lot of time working with the bottom third is we don't want to give up, right? I talk in my book about Willie Selmore, right? The sales rep.
Actually, it's funny, when you wrote that and I was reading it, I knew it was probably a name you had made up, but actually you read it so well, I had to go back and check just to make sure.
So Willie Selmore is an unproductive rep, but every time I interacted with him, and I use him as an example in my book, I had this question in my mind: will he sell more? So obviously, but anyway, the key is to focus on your B players. They typically have the greatest level of coachability, most receptive to your coaching, willing to implement it the fastest, and the largest gap between skills and they have a lot of room for improvement, and they can make those changes fast. The best sales teams I've ever had the privilege of leading had competition at the top, and the salespeople weren't competing with quota; they were competing with each other. Mm-hmm. And if you can take a B player and make him or her an A player and give other A players some competition, then you've just implemented what I call the bell cow strategy, where out on the ranch, the bell cow is the one that all the other ones follow behind. And who is your bell cow on your team? What example sales rep do others on the team look up to? And if it happens to be somebody who's infected with, as Zig Ziglar used to say, stinking thinking, then you're in a world of hurt. Right. And that's a problem that you need to address sooner rather than later. And so every time I bring up this bell cow strategy in my workshops, of course, the managers say, "Hey, what about cowbell? Do we need more cowbell?" So I wrote an article on the Saturday Night Live skit. You remember that one?
Oh, my favorite of all time.
Trying to draw the sales management principles out of more cowbell with Will Ferrell and what was his name?
Christopher Walken.
Yes, thank you.
It's a great song. I think it just needs more cowbell.
Yeah, and of course Jimmy Fallon's in the background.
Oh, just dying. Yes, Jimmy Fallon's can't keep a straight face during the entire skit.
So whether you remember bell cow or cowbell, every sales team needs more, right?
More cowbell. I like that.
You need more leaders.
I like it. And so, Kevin, we're in the last segment of the show where I've got some standard questions I ask all my guests. And in the first one, this is probably going to be dead simple for you, but the first one is a hypothetical scenario where you've just been hired as a VP of sales at a company whose sales have stalled out. CEO is anxious to hit the reset button, get things back on track as quickly as possible. So your first week on the job, what 2 things could you do that could have the biggest impact?
I would suggest do nothing. You got to figure out what the problem is and observe. Mm-hmm. Put yourself in a situation to observe the salespeople and how they interact with customers. And this isn't just the parachute type of meeting. It's go out and spend a full day with each of your salespeople. Maybe sometimes do something where they're not expecting you to spend the day with them. You're trying to find out what their work habits are, and you want to figure out who's part of the solution and who isn't. Because if they're not, assuming you're brought in because there's a problem and they want you to fix it, or they want me to fix it, I got to figure out who's going to be part of this solution and look at it from a skill and will perspective and assess the skill and attitude of each of my people before rendering any opinions. That's the first step is mm-hmm. to just figure out what the problem is.
Okay.
So that's in some respects why you hear a lot of political leaders say, "Well, here's what I'm going to do the first 100 days," and well, I suppose, but you got to get closer to your sales team and apply a prescription without diagnosis is malpractice.
Right.
So you got to diagnose it, and you can't diagnose it by not getting close to the problem.
Okay. All right. Good answer. So some rapid fire questions for you then. Just you can give me one word answers, or you can elaborate if you wish. So when you, Kevin Davis, are out selling your services, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
Great question. I think track record, the fact that
Mm-hmm.
I've walked in their shoes and have faced the problems and challenges that they have, plus have had the opportunity to work with sales managers in a workshop format. I mean, if you listen, sales managers have a lot of great things to say, and I'm delighted that many of them are listening to us today, Andy, but it's just every workshop I deliver, I keep a yellow pad sitting in the front, and you hear a lot of good stuff come back. And so I think maybe it's a little thing, but it's what I try to put in my book, which is perhaps more relevant than one might get elsewhere.
Okay. Who's your sales role model?
My sales role model would be, well, I would have to tip my cap to Neil Rackham as being the thought leader in transitioning the sales world from transactional to strategic, and backing it up with research.
Okay. Other than any of your own book, which one book would you recommend every salesperson read?
Every salesperson read? Oh, well, certainly you have to look at every book in terms of what it is you want to get out of it. I mean, I think my book, Slow Down, Sell Faster, is obviously self-promoting here, but
yeah, I said other than your own.
Okay, other than my own. Well, certainly I've read the Challenger Sale recently. My area of, besides that, New Sales Simplified.
Mm-hmm. Mike Weinberg.
Is a very good book.
Okay.
And on the management side of the equation,
sure.
Certainly Roberge's book, The Sales Acceleration Formula, has some great stuff in there. And what I try to do is read outside of the sales field, or at least make sure that a lot of the books I'm reading are from people that are outside. And so there's a great book called 8 Moments of Power in Coaching.
All right.
By Mark Colgate.
All right, that's a good one. We'll put that on the list. That's a new one.
Yeah, it's really good because he's got a lot of mentions and references a lot of the research on coaching. So again, I
like it. Good suggestion.
Yeah.
All right, so last question for you. It's sometimes a difficult question. It is, what music is on your playlist right now?
Right now, Van Morrison, Keep Me Singing.
Oh, yeah. I loved Van Morrison, Greatest Hits. Great album.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. But Keep Me Singing is a new album that he released just in September.
Oh, I'll have to check that out.
How about that?
That's new on me. That's on my list. Here we go. New Van Morrison. I love Van Morrison. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Kevin, thanks for being on the show today. Tell people how they can find out more about you and connect with you.
KevinFDavis.com is my personal website, and then TopLineLeadership.com is our company site. Certainly, either of those is a great way to contact me. But
and check on Amazon for your brand new book.
Check on Amazon, yep, and we'll
Sales Manager's Guide to Greatness.
Got the Sales Manager's Guide to Greatness: 10 Essential Strategies for Leading Your Team to the Top.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, Kevin, thanks for being on the show. And friends, thank you for spending time with us today. And remember, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. An easy way to do that: take a minute, subscribe to this podcast, Accelerate, and that way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Kevin Davis, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me, and until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.